Are you ready to embark on a journey of success? To discover your true potential in the untold stories of careers in life sciences? Welcome to PATHFINDER by the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. With your host, Tommy Soares, discover the untold stories of industry scientists and unveil the secrets to excelling in your career. Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Welcome everybody to Pathfinder. My name is Tommy Soares. I'm Director of Scientific Strategy and Relations of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. Today, I have the honor of welcoming Casey Hooker, who is the fungal strain engineer at Aqua Foods in Chicago, Illinois. Casey grew up in Rensselaer, a rural Northwest Indiana town, before earning his bachelor's degree in biochemistry from DePauw University in 2015. He then went on to work at the Aqua bioenergy company as a process operator before beginning graduate school at Purdue University in the Department of Agriculture and Biological Engineering. At Purdue, Casey worked with Dr. Kevin Solomon to build genetic engineering tools for anaerobic fungi. Beyond his graduate research, he also was involved with the ABE Graduate Student Association, the Binley Ambassador Program, and the Aqua, the Alpha Epsilon Honor Society. And upon completing his PhD, he joined the Chicago-based alternative food startup company Aqua Foods as the fungal strain engineer in 2023. Casey, thank you so much for being on the program. What a pleasure it is to speak to you and to get to meet you.
Thank you, Dr. Soares. It's a pleasure to be here and just talk about some of my experiences, and I'm happy to share whatever help and answers there may be.
Well, it seems to me like such a rich background already that you have from your experiences at DePauw, your experiences in industry, and then at Purdue. I love the trajectory that you've taken so far, and I want people to hear a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had in that trajectory, and you know what has led you to your current position, which I feel is fairly new, and I'm so excited to ask you about that and the process of getting that position that you're in now. So maybe you could take us all the way back as far as you want to take us to your early days, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So I grew up in rural Northwest Indiana, and my father's a farmer. He raises corn and soybeans. And so with that, just kind of that experience was always kind of had agriculture and sustainability kind of at the forefront of my mind. And just thinking about what we can do with crops that farmers raise has always been very important to me. And so when I went to undergraduate to study biochemistry, I wasn't really sure where this research and these efforts would kind of fit in. So I wanted to take a gap year after I finished, and I went back and I worked at the Iroquois bioenergy company as a process operator. And so this experience kind of showed me, what we can do with some of the crops that farmers raise. And so here we're using the starch from corn to make ethanol and distillers grains, which feed animals, and also corn oil. And so this was a really rich experience, just seeing, how scalable some of these processes are and the power of fermentation. But the kind of the challenge here is we're using food to make our fuel. And so that was something kind of in the back of my mind, like we need better ways to make our fuels and to make products from these crops without competing for food resources. And so that, and also just, I think with climate change also, we also might have years where crops are decimated, and so they may not produce the crop. And so if there are ways to use that plant biomass to make something else, that could be very powerful for farmers to still have a source of income. And so those two experiences and thoughts led me to go to graduate school at Purdue University. And so I worked with Dr. Kevin Solomon in the Agricultural and Biological Engineering Department. And we were working to build genetic engineering tools for anaerobic gut fungi. Sounds complicated. It's really not. We were just trying to harvest the microbes that break down the plant biomass in the digestive tracts of ruminant and hindgut fermenting animals. And so they're really good at breaking down the lignocellulose. And so one can think, if you could use those to break down that plant material, then you could upgrade that into fuels, chemicals, food alternatives. Really, it could be unlimited. And so I was working on that first step of just tapping into these fungi. And so I graduated last December, and now I'm up here in Chicago at Aquacultured Foods. I'm loving it so far. It's been a really great experience.
That's awesome. And it seems to me like this leap to this aquaculture foods role that you have was kind of natural coming out of Dr. Solomon's lab, right? This whole engineering and learning how to culture fungi, that must have been quite something. But I wonder, are there any pieces of your process operator days at Iroquois Bioenergy Company that helped you prepare for the lab, prepared you for doing this type of work? And it's a PhD that you did with Dr. Solomon, right?
So you're asking if, like, the time at Iroquois helped me for graduate school, or for my current position now, or both?
For graduate school, really. I mean, because it not too many people have this, well, I'm going to go to industry for a little bit and check it out before coming back to grad school, and deciding that you had a vision and a focus, right? And we've heard it before on the program where people, they have this experience in industry, and that makes their PhD so much richer because they know exactly what they're going after.
I think for me, a lot of it was, I guess the first would be seeing the power that microorganisms have. I mean, when at the ethanol plant, they're using yeast to make the ethanol. And so these yeast lines have been engineered to be really hyper producing strains that make a lot of ethanol. And so just seeing that at scale was really powerful. And I think also just, knowing that as a graduate student, you can do a lot of awesome work, but that doesn't mean it will ever see the light of day. And I think also that, so being mindful of, is the work I'm doing actually going to make a difference, and how far out is this from making a difference? So I was trying to be mindful of that. I mean, the work we were doing is obviously very far from some anaerobic process out in industry, but you have to start somewhere and not be afraid to start. And I think that was the excitement. That was the exciting part of the project I was on.
And I mean, that's courageous, really, really courageous, right? Like, you're just gonna go and you're gonna start. I love that, because it's a piece of guidance that I don't know as that we hear all the time, but we do in a certain way, that you just have to muster up the courage and get going with it, right? And just, but make sure that you're prepared to take on the responsibilities and so on, and the commitment. What about that work ethic? Did you get much of that as a process operator? Or was that more afterwards,
I think seeing that was a good experience. So at IBEC, we were working at Iroquois Bioenergy Company. We were working 12-hour shifts. So I was a month of days and a month of nights. And so I think just kind of seeing that was also was a good experience. I mean, just working nights was altogether different than undergraduate or graduate school and what I do now. And I think just, knowing that in order to have these processes, there's a lot that has to go on to monitor them and to keep them, on track. And there were times at night when the plant went down and there was only 4 of us there that are responsible for all of it. And it was just insane trying to get everything back up when that would happen. And so I think part of it just like, this is a lot of work to manage, but also, thinking, how could we make these processes better so they're not so susceptible to stuff like that as well.
Yeah, and getting exposed to those scales, right? The
Yes, yeah.
magnitude of the scale, as you said, there's only 4 of you and the whole plant shuts down and you gotta get it started again, or you gotta correct or whatever it might be. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, can you relate back to a story or an event at night that, because you speak about it vividly.
Yeah, so when it's on days, there are a lot more people there, a lot more is going on. And when it's on nights, you've got a cook who's in charge of adding the enzymes and getting the chemicals ready for the fermentations. You have someone on distillation who's making sure that the proof of the alcohol is in line with where you want it, and they'll measure like the DDGs, which is like the distiller's grains. So there's like a non-fermented part of this process, and they're making sure that's as dry as it's supposed to be. And you have someone else who's just kind of keeping track of like all the alarms and stuff like that. So they're kind of like the crew lead, and there's another person that just kind of floats from process to process. And so when we're on nights, there's just those 4 people going around collecting samples, just kind of checking out the process. And so we had a really bad storm one night, and we lost power and everything just goes dark. And I remember the crew lead just saying, just wait, it's going to come back. And as soon as it did, all the alarms, all of them, we have 4 computer monitors, they're all flashing, tanks are overflowing. It was crazy. So we spent the rest of the shift cleaning up and just getting everything brought back online. And it was pretty much nonstop until the shift ended, getting everything back ready. It was quite a lot of work. So we never wanted the plant to go down. That was a very traumatizing experience.
Wow, that must have been crazy though. What a
Yes,
hectic
yes,
but geez. But okay, so you go from this experience or this, high intensity. I'm sure it wasn't high intensity all the time, but like when things like this happen, you're like, you got to be on the go. And you go from something like that type of experience, now back into grad school, where it's a different pace. It's, but it's really up to you what you put into it that you're going to get out. So, how was that transition?
I mean, I think it went smoothly. I mean, I want to thank Dr. Kevin Solomon too. I mean, he made it very clear, like, you're only paid for 20 hours a week, but the expectation is 60. And I think realistically, that's the only way you will get everything done in time. Like, you have to be in there, long days on the weekends. And so with working at the ethanol plant, I was okay with that. It didn't matter to me if I needed to be there till 8 or 9 on a weeknight or come in and work, a few hours on a Saturday or Sunday. And so I was okay with that. And so I think early on, I was just doing a lot of work, but it didn't really become productive work until the end of the PhD.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way, that I could have done almost my entire PhD in the last 6 months of the whole thing, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so what was it about Dr. Solomon? Tell us a little bit about his mentoring or types of things that you can remember that were so impactful and useful for you as you moved through the lab.
But he was a really great mentor. I think, you know, he was really patient when, in my stubbornness of like, no, I'll get this, no, I'll get this. And I think, okay, no, maybe he's right. Maybe I won't get it to be like I think it will. So I think just his patience, and then also asking us why. Like, why are you doing that? You need to convince me why this is a good use of your time, my money, and why this will be something we can publish. And even in my current job, the CEOs of our company will be like, you need to convince us why we should spend money on this project. Why are you doing that? And they've told me, like, you do a very good job of motivating why you're doing what you're doing. And it's very important, I think, because they're not the ones doing the science. I am. And so when I need to say, I need to buy an HPLC, $100,000 instrument, you
Right.
better have a good reason for it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, yeah.
Justification, right? You have to
Yes.
justify it all. And oh, that's so great. I think that might be the first time we're hearing something like this, which is, be prepared to make your case and understand that people on the other side of the table they're mining or minding the dollars in a different way than you are. That is so unique, so awesome. I'm glad that Kevin did that, and I'm sure he continues to do that. But so, I know I skipped your DePauw University time, but let's go back a little bit to that time when you were in that biochemistry program. Anything there that you think, my gosh, this was a rich time in my life that now thinking back, I do have some of those skills or whatever you picked up during that time at DePauw?
There were a couple. So I think so. I hadn't mentioned this, but I was on the swim team all 4 years, and so I competed with a lot of great men and women. That I think just that experience, leadership, leading by example, I think was really important. So there were a lot of great people I swam with, and so outside of the pool, they were very helpful. And here are the clubs you should be in. Here are the professors you should talk to. That sort of thing, and just balancing a schedule too. We're getting up and swimming in the morning and after classes every day for most of the year. And so that was really important for getting good time management skills early on in my life.
Yeah.
And that, went into the time at IBEC and then into the time at graduate school. You have to budget your time wisely to get everything done that you needed to. And I think also, besides that, so I had done some research with Dr. Jeff Hansen in organic chemistry, and that was a really cool experience as well. I would say that was less agricultural focused, but it was just neat to be in the lab and just to kind of see the power of chemistry to make different types of things. And while nothing was ever published, we did discover like a new route to synthesize like a tetrahydroisoindole, and that is like an active region in some anti-cancer drugs. So that was a really cool experience. I wish I'd done more as an undergraduate student while I was at DePauw, but I really enjoyed the time with him, and he was a really great mentor as well.
Tell us a little bit about him. What was he like?
Very quiet. I mean, I remember the first time I met him, I just said, "Hey, would it be possible for me to do research in your lab?" And he's like, "Oh, sure, sure. Come to my office next Tuesday." And so I do that, and then he gets up on his whiteboard and he's like, "This is kind of what we're working on. We're going to make this compound." And he studied epoxides, and so I remember asking him, "Why this? Like, why should we study this?" And his exact answer was, "Because I think it's cool." And I love that, like the honesty of that, and I really enjoyed, that experience, and just the power of the different things we could make with these epoxides, which was very interesting and intriguing to me.
Well, that must have been quite an eye-opening experience for sure. And
Yeah.
it sounds like, was he a gentle person? Did he help you kind of get into it as well and find that passion?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, like the way it was set up at DePaul, like his office had windows into the area we did research at, so he could just kind of like pop over and see what we're doing. So he would just, kind of come out and around and chat with us as needed. And I worked with a few other students as well. So it was also, interacting with these other undergraduate students and talking about them. Aaron Crable also went to Purdue University and got his PhD, and we worked at the same undergraduate lab in Jeff Hansen's lab on epoxide. So it was neat. I saw him a couple times at Purdue after graduating, which was really cool as well.
That is cool. It's a small world,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
And Casey, tell us a little bit then, how was that transition? The transition from DePauw, you did the industry stint. How was that like? Was that, I mean, how did you get that job or that role as a process operator?
So I leaving DePaul, I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go. So I think I'll step back to answer just a little bit. So a lot of my peers at DePaul went more medical school route. In the biochemistry department, a lot of people would go that route. And I knew from the get-go, I'm like, I do not want to be a medical doctor. That's just not my thing. I prefer just doing the work myself. I would say I'm less of a people person and more, I want to be analyzing data and at the bench. And so I wasn't really sure, where that might lead me. And so I said, I'm just going to take a gap year. We'll figure it out, and we'll evaluate after a year. And so my dad farms, and so I worked on his farm for a couple months, and then this position at IBEC opened up, and so I just called out there and said, if you have an opening, I'd be really interested in working out here. And a couple months go by, and then they finally reached back out to me. They're like, we've got an opening, we'd be happy to interview you. And it went from there. And so I continued working on my dad's farm and working at IBEC for this 2015 to 2016 period. And then towards the end, I think after, some of the times the plant went down, and, thinking about how these processes could be better, and that led me to want to go to this route to graduate school, where perhaps, you could do some research that might, find a new way to make different molecules or compounds, or use plant biomass that doesn't rely on using food as an input to make your product. And so that's kind of what led me to Purdue.
Yeah, but so tell us a little bit, how did you sell yourself to IBEC? And I know you kind of glanced over it as well. I let them know that I was interested, or that I liked the company. But what was it that you think persuaded them to call you back? Because, I mean, you can just send a CV or a resume and be like, oh yeah, call me if you need me. But we know that that doesn't necessarily work all the time. How did you persuade them?
Well, so I was really interested in like a lab technician position. So I felt like that was more in line with what I had done at DePauw, like just being in the lab, doing these sorts of analyses, using the equipment, that sort of thing. And they said, well, we don't have an opening, but we might have a process position open up. And I wasn't really sure, because that was out of the realm of what I knew. Like, I hadn't really done anything in process work before. And I kind of spoke to my mom and dad about it a little bit. They're like, no, just give it a chance. You might like it. And I think doing the process position really was more in line with what I enjoyed at the time than like the lab work. I mean, I think the lab work there is you just grab a sample, you run the sample, you write the result down and go. And so I think you kind of get to see more of the equipment. You get to get in the tanks and the fermenters, and you get to see a lot of the stuff as an operator. And so I think that kind of opened my eyes to how these processes are occurring. And so I really think doing the operations position was a lot more beneficial to me than had I just been in the lab technician position. And so after talking to my parents, I spoke with them, and I took up the position as soon as IBEC reached back out to me.
So, here are a couple things that I'm observing, or observing from our conversation. Having this farming background, I think you probably had, as you said, that that sense of responsibility from an early age. You're getting up, helping dad. Early hours were not stranger to you, when you had to wake up and go for the swim before getting to class, and this and that. And it seems to me like that gave you a certain work ethic that maybe IBEC also kind of saw, like, oh, this is he's a farm boy, he understands what we are at least harvesting here. He might not know all the processes, but then the biochemistry piece must have also been compelling for them, I think. It would have been for me, right?
I think so. So when I interviewed with the plant manager, he had said, he's like, we love that you've got the farming background, because farmers are bringing their corn in every day for this, and they're selling the DDGs to farmers and to other organizations as well. And so having someone that is in tune with the process, I think, helped. And I think just demonstrating, I graduated from college, I swam, and so I think they saw a lot of the work ethic and the desire to go above and beyond, early on. And so I think that was a nice piece to kind of say, this person should be someone we consider, at least for the job.
Yeah, awesome. And I think, I think you have it. You demonstrated that kind of commitment to so many of your other activities, that it must have been like, oh, this guy is serious about it. That's wonderful. And so let's jump now, if we can, again, back to that transition from Dr. Solomon's lab. You finish your PhD. I know he moved from Purdue to Delaware, University of Delaware, if I'm not mistaken. Did you end up going to Delaware with him, or did you stick around here and finished here?
So Kevin left Purdue at the end of 2020 and accepted a position in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware. And I went out with him to Delaware for a couple of years, and I was just doing my research out there. So I still have the Purdue degree, but I just thought it would be a really interesting experience to set up a new lab and to just see what is out in Delaware and to interact with that department. And that was a really powerful experience as well. I was really, fortunate to kind of get the best of both worlds. And there were organizations out there that I would have never been involved with had I not gone. Like there was a program for Chinese hamster ovary cells for producing antibodies. And so I got to supervise a couple undergraduate students on that. And that was only because I went out there to Delaware with Kevin and I was involved with that. I got to go to Tulane for a summer for a conference, and also to Clemson University for a conference. So that was a really cool experience I got to have because I moved to Delaware with Kevin.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I can't believe you have CHO cell antibody production experience too. That's a gem. You need to put that somewhere on your CV. We need to record that, Casey, because that somebody might be calling you about that. It's quite a skill set to have. But it was all around fermentation again, and cell culture and production of molecules using cells as bioreactors, and systems engineering, metabolic engineering, which is so awesome. And I've worked with Dr. Solomon previously, so I know a little bit about the mechanics of at least the way he approaches some of these problems. And it's so wonderful to be able to see some of the the students that have graduated from his lab and hear your story, to hear where that journey has taken you. So you're finishing the PhD, you're in Delaware. This Aquacultured Foods is in Chicago. How did you learn about them? What was that whole process of, like, you wooing them, or maybe they wooed you into coming and working for them?
So I'll step back a little bit, I think, to answer this as well. So it was around July of 2022, and I'm starting to think about, where am I going to go after I graduate? And I knew at this point of my graduate experience, I knew I wanted to go into industry, and I started to kind of look for different companies. I just had this list, where they're at, what they do, do I want to be at a big company or a small company? And so I'm getting this list, I'm looking around, and I find someone who works at Aquacultured Foods, and I looked at his LinkedIn profile. That was it. I didn't message him or anything. And a couple days later, he messages me and he's like, "Hey, I think you should apply for this job based on your LinkedIn profile. I think you'd be a great fit." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not quite ready to graduate. Like, I've got to write my dissertation still. So we'll see in a few months where we're at." And so around October, November, I reached back out and I messaged the project lead or technical director here, "Hey, if you've got an opening, like, I'd be really interested in this position." And it moved very fast from there. So he responded in just a couple days, and there were a couple rounds of interviews. They flew me out here for a visit, and then I started January 3rd. So it was a very quick turnaround from graduating in December to starting up here early January.
But so I've heard of this happening before, right? Like, you look at people's LinkedIn profiles and they call you back because they look at your profile and be like, "Oh, I know something about this." So, I mean, that's an interesting event to have occurred, because it usually, you would think it might happen the other way, but it's maybe this reciprocation type of dynamic that occurs when you look at somebody's profile.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you only get snippets of information too. Like I don't put everything about like my background. There's a lot that I've done that's not on LinkedIn, for example, because I think you want to have more to talk about too. So like you showcase maybe some of the best things on LinkedIn. And so I had tried to do that, but there was a lot more that I didn't include on it. And so that way, when you meet with people at companies, you can have new things to talk about because they'll know what you put on LinkedIn already. And so
Yes.
just kind of trying to have more things to pull out to talk about, I think is very important. So I try to do that when I can. I think it's a helpful thing to do. It makes conversations a little bit easier. But yeah, I think that was a very helpful thing to do in that interview process with aquaculture foods.
Very, very interesting and great guidance there, Casey, because I think, people would be surprised or pleasantly surprised to know you have other skills that you might not be listing there. Um, it does make me think that you're not as findable for some of those other skills, and you're findable for the skills that you are representing on your LinkedIn profile. So can you give us some tips of like what should we be doing with our LinkedIn profile? Or I mean, I think you covered some of the stuff, but is there anything else? Like, did you connect with that person at Aquacultured Foods, or did you just look at their profile?
So I looked at one person's profile, and then we connected after that. And after the connection, then he messaged me and he's like, "Hey, you should apply here." And I'm kind of pumping the brakes this time because my dissertation is like just maybe 20 pages at this point. Like it's not anywhere close to being done. And so, as I'm writing my dissertation, I connected with a few more people that worked at this company, just kind of seeing what their backgrounds were, what led them to this position, this area. And then around October, November was when I reached back out to the technical director and said, "Hey, if you've got an opening, let me know." And so from there was no JD listed at the time, no job description listed at the time, but they did create one and send it to me really quickly. So it sounded like they were kind of in the process of hiring. They weren't quite sure who they wanted at the time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of that stepping in and that communication on LinkedIn helped expedite it in my favor, I believe.
Awesome. Awesome. And so, is this a unique job? Nobody else has had this particular position in this company before. Are you the first? Are you a pioneer, Casey?
So we're a team of like 9 right now, 9 or 10. So it's a very small startup company. There are 2 fungal strain engineers here, and I'm one of them. And so I would say, yes, I'm a pioneer, but I'm not the only pioneer. I've got some great people I can bounce ideas off of here as well. So it's not just me.
Tell us a little bit about some of the advice you've been getting from these wonderful people that you talk about.
So as like, you mean like career advice or just like
Sure.
scientific advice?
Both. I mean, I think it's a combination, right? Soft skills, it's scientific skills, it's business skills, whatever you think has been most impactful for you as you've started to work in this position.
So there are 4 PhD researchers right now. 2 of those, myself being one of them, are in the fungal side. We're all very fresh PhDs. There were 3 that were hired end of 2022, beginning of 2023. Mary Casper joined back in May of 2022, and she's more on biomaterials work. So we're all, just right out of graduate school. So we all kind of commiserate over the woes of graduate school. We're all finishing papers up still from graduate school. I think just kind of how we attack projects. I think everyone's kind of got their different approach to doing that. And so for me, I kind of like to do work in R and kind of do more analysis and kind of sit down and analyze it. I think some people prefer to read papers more. And there are some that kind of are okay with hopping projects or like, I'll help out with that project a little bit, even though it's not really like what their primary project is. And I think being open to that is very important, being able to see what the product developers do. So hopping on some of their work is very intriguing. It's very different from what any of us would have done during graduate school. So I think being open to the different projects is powerful. And I think lastly, just kind of interacting with the CEOs as well. I mean, the way they think is entirely different than how a graduate student may think. You know, they're big picture focused with the state of the company, where we're going to be a few years out. And I'm thinking about, you know, what this experiment's going to look like, you know, how I'm going to visualize this data. And it's just so different. And I think that has been something that I'm still trying to navigate and understand more as an early scientist at this company.
That's wonderful. And that you get exposure to that is also so unique. I think it's unique from the perspective that in a startup company, you get to have more of these intimate relationships with the group, the founders and the CEOs and everybody in the company, because it's not that many people and everybody plays multiple roles, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we all kind of, you know, do things as needed. So like we do production runs to like make our product right now, and the scientists help out, the product developer helps out, like we're all kind of involved in it. And when we have equipment that needs built, we all get involved in it. And so I really love that aspect because it feels a lot like a team. I think at a big company, you're going to be like, okay, where does my work fit in here? I don't really see how this is actually affecting the process. But with us here at this company at a startup, you can see your contribution every day. And I absolutely love that.
You mentioned that before, that you wanted to do something that was applicable, something that was pragmatic and useful, that motivated you from the very beginning to get into some kind of work, some kind of research where you're contributing and you're delivering something that is tangible in that sense. Do you continue to be motivated by that? I see. And you know, does that contribution that you are making into something that is tangible like that, does that feel like it's more real because of the small team that you have and everybody is kind of working it together? You feel like it's more your baby than if somebody's working at a larger company and they don't really know, as you said, what place they play in that particular research or development?
I think it does feel more like it's mine. I would say. I mean, we're kind of involved in scaling up our process like to a pilot scale right now, and we're evaluating different ways to do this that will be, you know, the fastest, quickest, least chance of contamination, that sort of thing. And so I'm piloting out a few different ways that we can evaluate that. And, you know, if it works, then I can say, okay, I have designed this step of the process. And I think that would be very cool to see. I mean, in graduate school, it's really just you doing your work. But here, this would be, if I get it to work, then someone else will be doing it and using this moving forward. And just knowing that I've contributed to this process, that it's working and it's working well, I think it would make me feel very good with all the experiences I've had to know that I've done something that is taking us a step in the right direction.
Yeah, what a fulfillment, right? What a feeling of satisfaction. Casey, I look at your LinkedIn profile and there's this beautiful picture of sushi quality alternative seafood that Aquacultured Foods is developing. Tell us a little bit about this. What is it? What role are you playing as the fungal strain engineer? If you can divulge a little bit about what is that role that you play for this particular product.
So we're trying to make meat-free seafood, and so you can think of shrimp, scallop, tuna, and so these products are microbially produced, and we have different organisms we're using to produce them. And so my role is on trying to increase the nutritional content of this. So right now it's a plant-based product, and so that plant-based just means that it's meat-free, but that also encompasses microbially produced. And so these are microbially produced products, and we are trying to increase the nutritional content of them and to produce these efficiently and economically. So it's kind of a hybrid of improving the nutrition and improving the way we produce the product.
And is this the first type of company like this that is producing, you hear about the meat steak in a lab type of thing, but this one seems to be focused on seafood as an alternative, right?
That is correct. Yeah. So there's a variety of different approaches you'll see in the alternative food space in general. Like some are trying to grow the cells and to make the meat that way. We are not trying to do that. We make our product through fermentation, and so this is not like we're having cells and then like it's like animal cells. We're not doing that. That's too far removed from what we'd like to do. So yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about, because I see this also as a sustainability type of dynamic for this company. Does that move you? Did that compel you to work with this company? You did mention, environmental stewardship before, or at least, consciousness of helping to maintain the environment. Are you also motivated to work with this company because it is a product that is an alternative to regular or aquaculture farming practices?
I think it's a variety of things. I mean, I think with climate change, that with overfishing, we really need to come up with other foods. And I think this is something that is just so important as the human population is growing. We need to find nutritional alternatives that don't compete with fish and with other types of meat, for example. And so what we're trying to do is come up with an alternative product that matches the texture and matches the nutrition of what's out there already. And we're very excited with what we have already. We're still trying to improve it some more, but we're very encouraged with what we have. And so I think it's very exciting moving forward. But the sustainability aspect of it, absolutely. I think that, if we can make our foods more sustainably, that is just, so critical to feeding a population that's growing as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Casey, as we start to wrap up the conversation here, are there any questions that I should have asked you that you didn't hear or you want me to ask you? Okay.
I don't think there's anything specific. I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you today and getting to know your trajectory, your journey. It is fascinating to see you go through this whole really dynamic adventure in your life, and the way that you've traversed through each one of these episodes is just wonderful to see. And I am so excited about what your future brings too, because I see you kind of as a pioneer of, alternative foods and alternative ways of preparing foods, which is a lot in people's minds. And I thank you so much for being part of the show.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be a Purdue alum, and I owe most of this experience now to my time at Purdue and my time with Kevin Solomon, and it's an absolute pleasure to share some of these experiences I've had.
Well, thank you, Dr. Casey Hooker, who is the fungal strain engineer at Aquacultured Foods. Thank you for being our Pathfinder today.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.